Hi, I'm Emily Harbour, and today I'm going to be discussing and going further into the concept of a communication model, which is defined as a visual, simplified representation of complex relationships in the communication process, meaning that it's just a visual for how messages are exchanged between a sender and a receiver. And the message exchange is the transaction of verbal and nonverbal messages being sent simultaneously between two people. There are three models that we're going to be discussing today: the linear model, interactional model, and transactional model. All three of which have main components that are all similar. They each have a sender, a message, a receiver, the channel in which the message travels along, as well as outside noise and the context of which the message is being transferred upon. The sender is the source of the message, where you get your information from. The actual message is what the sender would like to move to the receiver, and the receiver is the intended target of the message. The channel is the pathway through which a message is sent, and noise is anything that interferes with accurate transmission or reception of a message. There are four types of noise: physical, physiological, psychological, and semantic. Physical noise is any stimuli outside of a sender or receiver that interfere with the transmission or reception of a message, meaning like if you can't hear your professor because someone next to you has on loud jewelry, or even if someone is wearing sunglasses that are very distracting, even though that's not something physical like chewing gum or bangles of a bracelet, it still is distracting physically from how you are perceiving the message. Physiological noise is biological influences on a sender or a receiver that interfere with the transmission or reception of a message. So like if someone is deaf or blind, they could get the intended message wrong because of that problem. Psychological noise is defined as biases, prejudices, and feelings that interfere with the accurate transmission or reception of messages. So like if I was told a rumor about another person before I had met them, and then I did meet them, my interaction with the person beforehand of the rumor would then cloud my judgment of actually meeting that person because I already had a previous thought process. And then there's semantic noise, which occurs when senders and receivers apply different meanings to the same message, like jargon and technical language. And if language was used in like the 1970s versus today, like I know in the 80s they used like tubular, which today if we were to hear that, we might not know exactly what that means, so that could interfere with the message being received. Along with noise, the context in which the message is being sent also controls how it is inferred. Context is important because it affects how the message is received and interpreted. There are four types of context: physical context, which is the tangible environment in which communication occurs. So if my friend told me that she needed to talk to me about boys or something, she would probably want to do that in more of a one-on-one place, like a dinner table versus like a loud coffee shop. Cultural context, which is cultural environment in which communication occurs, rules, roles, norms, and patterns of communication that are unique. So for example, if my grandmother were to speak Italian and I am just fluent in English, the way that she would send a message to me and the way that I would infer it might get mixed up because of the different languages that are spoken. There's social emotional context, which means relational and emotional environment in which communication occurs. So like a job interview, that's why you might feel comfortable in one job interview versus another because of the way that the social emotional context was taking place. Historical context, which is a type of context in which messages are understood in relationship to previous sent messages. So like if someone were to tell me in a relationship that I love you and they were to say it for the first time, it would mean more to me. But if I knew that they said I love you to like everyone else, it wouldn't mean as much. So it depends on how they historically use that in previous terms. So to get started, we're going to talk about the linear model of communication first, which it is a characterization of communication as a one-way process that transmits from a sender to a receiver. There's no feedback. That's why when the channel starts, it stops once it gets to the receiver. There's no feedback, there's no information being given back. An example of this would be like a college lecture, church sermons, or how I'm presenting this now. Next is the interactional model of communication, which is a characterization of communication as a two-way process in which a message is sent from a sender to receiver and from receiver to sender. This means that when the sender sends a message to the receiver, that receiver also sends back a message to the sender. And each sender and receiver have a field of experience, which is like what they previously know in their knowledge. So, say you're in a debate. This is a perfect example of an interactional model of communication. In a debate, there's one person and they have their field of experience, what their knowledge is on the subject. They are going to send their message over to the other side, to the receiver, and they are going to take that message and they're going to use their own field of experience, and they're going to send a message back to the sender. But they're not building upon the own message. They're just stating their own. That's why the communication channel stays open. That's why there's arrows, because it's constant back and forth. Yes. Both models, the linear and interactional model, acknowledge that human communication involves both speaking and listening, but asserts them as separate events. So these do not occur simultaneously. The last model of communication that we are going to be discussing is the transactional model of communication, which is defined as a characterization of communication as the reciprocal sending and receiving of messages. So you're going to have communicator A, and they're going to send a message, and communicator B is going to send a message back, just like the interactional model. The only difference here is with their fields of experience, they're each going to have their own, but they're also going to have a shared field of experience, meaning that because they have a shared field of experience, they're going to be building on their topic or their communication source. So like, that's why when you first meet someone, you want to ask them like, what's your major, what's your favorite color, where are you from? Because you want to build that common ground. And once that common ground is set, then you build on the topic that you were talking on. The sender and the receiver do not send messages like, here's a message being sent, here I'm receiving it, here's a message being sent. These happen simultaneously. The main difference between the transactional model of communication and the other two is that transactional model of communication involves the use of time, and it also takes into account nonverbal messages, meaning that if this person were to send a message to communicator B and they see a look on their face and they're like, what? Then it's like they would acknowledge that, and then they would be able to build upon and maybe like clarify what communicator B had shown that they did not know. Yeah, those are the three models that we're going to talk about. So hope you enjoyed this video.